Hidden inside your skull, smaller than a pea, is an organ that every ancient civilization on Earth independently described as the seat of the human soul, and modern science is only now beginning to understand why they may have been right. This is the pineal gland, a tiny pine cone-shaped structure buried deep in the center of your brain. And its story is one of the most extraordinary convergences in the history of human thought. To understand why this tiny organ captivated the ancient world, we need to start in Egypt roughly 5,000 years ago. The Eye of Horus, one of the most recognizable symbols in all of human history, was not merely a decorative motif. When Egyptologists overlaid the Eye of Horus onto a cross-section of the human brain, something astonishing emerged. The anatomical structures of the brain, the thalamus, the corpus callosum, the pineal gland itself, map with striking precision onto the individual components of that sacred symbol. The Egyptians called the pineal the seat of the soul and believed it was the organ through which the gods communicated with the living. They preserved it carefully during mummification, understanding it to be as sacred as the heart. But Egypt was not alone in this remarkable conclusion. Across the Indian subcontinent, Hindu scholars had independently arrived at an almost identical belief through an entirely different intellectual tradition.
In the ancient Sanskrit texts of Hinduism, the sixth chakra, the Ajna, is positioned exactly between and slightly above the eyebrows in the location commonly called the third eye. Ajna means command in Sanskrit, and it was considered the center of intuition, perception beyond ordinary sight, and direct communion with higher consciousness. The symbol associated with it is a circle with two petals, a shape that, if you look closely, bears a remarkable resemblance to the pineal gland, flanked by its two hemispheric neighbors in the brain. This tradition is at least 3,000 years old and developed entirely independently of Egyptian thought. Then came the Greeks. Herophilus, one of the first anatomists of the ancient world, wrote about the pineal gland in the 3rd century BCE, calling it the sphincter that regulated the flow of thought and memory. But it was Plato who elevated the concept to its most philosophical heights. In his dialogues, Plato described the soul as residing in the center of the brain and the body's highest faculty of reason, emanating from precisely that anatomical region. For Plato, the brain was a microcosm of the cosmos, and its central organ was the point where the divine touched the mortal. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years to the 17th century, and we find René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, making a claim that shocked his contemporaries. Descartes declared that the pineal gland was the principal seat of the soul, and the place in which all our thoughts are formed. For Descartes, it was the singular point where the immaterial mind interfaced with the physical body. He was mocked by later scientists for this idea, and yet the fact remains that one of the most rigorous analytical thinkers in Western history arrived at exactly the same conclusion as the Egyptian priests, the Hindu sages, and the Greek philosophers. And then there is the Vatican. In the heart of St. Peter's Square in Rome stands one of the largest pinecone sculptures in the world, over 4 meters tall, cast in ancient bronze. It once stood at the center of a fountain near the Pantheon, and the Vatican chose it as the centerpiece of its own Cortile della Pina, the court of the pinecone. The pinecone has appeared in Sumerian artwork, Assyrian palace reliefs, Dionysian processions, Buddhist iconography, and the staff of Osiris. Across every major civilization, this unmistakable pine cone shape, which mirrors the pineal gland almost exactly, was used as a symbol of spiritual awakening and divine enlightenment. So what exactly is the pineal gland doing in modern biology that might justify all of this ancient reverence? The pineal gland produces melatonin, the hormone that regulates your sleep cycles and your sense of time. But in the 1990s, Dr. Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico made a far more controversial discovery. Strassman proposed and gathered substantial supporting evidence that the pineal gland may also produce trace amounts of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, one of the most potent psychedelic compounds known to science, found throughout the natural world in hundreds of plant and animal species. DMT is produced naturally in the human body, and Strassman's research suggested it may be released in significant quantities at birth, during deep states of meditation, in moments of extreme stress or near death, and possibly at the moment of death itself.
People who have experienced clinical DMT administration consistently report encounters with geometric light, a sense of profound cosmic significance, and the unmistakable feeling of contact with an intelligence beyond themselves. The parallels to descriptions of mystical experience found in every ancient religious tradition are impossible to ignore. This is where the story takes a darker turn. The pineal gland is the only unpaired organ in the brain, and uniquely among brain tissues, it sits outside the blood-brain barrier. This means it is directly exposed to everything circulating in your bloodstream. And, beginning in the 20th century, researchers began noticing something troubling. Pineal glands from modern adults were calcifying at unprecedented rates, accumulating deposits of calcium phosphate crystals that progressively reduce the organ's function. Studies have found that in many Western populations, up to 40% of adults show significant pineal calcification by their late teens. Research has identified fluoride as a primary driver of this calcification. A 1997 study by Jennifer Luke found that the pineal gland accumulates more fluoride than any other tissue in the body, including bone. Fluoride began being added to municipal water supplies in the United States in 1945, and today approximately 70% of Americans drink fluoridated water. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented biochemical process. The debate is not whether fluoride calcifies the pineal gland, but whether the calcification matters. And that is a question that mainstream science has been remarkably reluctant to investigate thoroughly. So we arrive at the question that has haunted philosophers and mystics for thousands of years, now reframed in the language of neuroscience and public health. The Egyptians, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Romans, Descartes, the ancient Sumerians had MRI machines or molecular chemistry, and yet they all pointed to the same quarter-inch structure at the center of the human brain and said, this is where something extraordinary happens. Whether you believe the pineal gland is a biological antenna for states of consciousness that transcend ordinary experience, or simply a fascinating endocrine organ whose full function we have not yet mapped, one thing is undeniable. For thousands of years, humanity knew something was there. The question worth asking is what we may have lost by stopping looking. If this journey through the hidden history of your own mind left you with more questions than answers, that is exactly where the most important discoveries begin. Subscribe to History Retold and keep asking.